Natsume's Book of Friends is a modern take on the classical yokai stories. Cool, what does that mean? Well, if I were to grossly oversimplify, there are two types of traditional stories of the supernatural coming out from Japan. The ones like the tale of Minamoto no Raiko, going against the great evil and defeating it through divine aid and strength of arms, or with a warrior's cunning, but far more common than these heroic depictions are stories of trickster spirits, local gods and human compassion towards the supernatural, and that's what Natsume's Book of Friends is about. It's a story of a young man seeking his place in this truly unfortunate universe we call home. Takashi Natsume is an orphan who can see yokai, causing him to become an outcast, not due to any inherent fault of his own at being able to perceive the supernatural, but by him being a kid, constantly asking questions about beings nobody else can see. Just imagine how creepy that is coming from a 4-year-old. As Natsume grows, he learns that people find it mildly off-putting if you keep talking to shadows or reference dead relatives as if they were in the room, and so begins to shut himself off from the world and from his myriad foster parents. That is until he gets, once again, moved from a relative to an even more distant relation, ending up in the Fujiwara household out in the countryside, while also inheriting what equates to a weapon of mass destruction from his late grandmother Natsume Reiko, this being the titular Book of Friends, a collection of true names of yokai once defeated by Reiko in glorious battle, also known as rock, paper, scissors, the power of a name being a staple in many a form of supernatural tale from all around the world, and in this Japan is no exception. Who holds the name controls the entity it belongs to, and one having at their beck and call a veritable army of monsters could cause some serious damage if directed towards personal gain. Keyword being if. But Natsume is not that kind of a person, and this is not that kind of a story. Were it Jujutsu Kaisen or Demon Slayer, sure, the Book of Friends would be an artifact of untold destruction, but here there are no demons or curses that are unequivocally evil. Nothing's quite that black and white, as traditionally that is the nature of yokai. Some may be malevolent or even outright hostile, but even then that hostility is more often than not man-made. Humans invade their lands or neglect them, which in turn makes the Ayakashi resent humanity. Evil energies fester, and that leads to violence between the two. But beyond these fringe cases, the yokai tend to be carefree creatures existing beyond the boundaries of human society, and sometimes even concepts that define our very existence. Concepts such as time. Making it a world people, even the likes of Natsume, can only glimpse at, but those little moments of peeling back the veil change a person to a point where being wholly human becomes equally difficult, leading to Natsume becoming a liminal entity in more ways than one. He exists literally in between worlds, never truly belonging in either, but there are also those times when he makes the conscious decision to not belong, such as with the exorcists with whom, by right, he should have the most in common with. And this is where the identity of Natsume's Book of Friends really comes from. It's a story of growth and finding one's place in the world, or in this case in several, or possibly none. And I'm sure by now you're sufficiently confused as to what you can actually expect from the show, but it's really quite simple. It's an episodic story that could be described as Monster of the Week, told in a way where the reader, or in this case the viewer, gets to decide when it ends. And this is very much by design. The author Yuki Midorikawa specifically stated that she did not want to write a story that would end, but instead go on for as long as she felt like it, and to give her audience the same freedom. Natsume's Book of Friends was written in a way that any of its self-contained little tales can be the end, if you so choose. Why would you choose to stop though? Well, that's another matter entirely. As for myself, I really cannot think of a good reason, as the Book of Friends happens to be one of my favourite anime of all time. Not because it's some literary masterpiece or has the best hype or anything, and if I'm being completely honest, it doesn't really even get me all that excited, and at times it can get a little overly shoujo, being based on a shoujo manga and all that, but what it does is offer the ultimate feel-good experience for those moments when you need to relax. Sure, sometimes I feel like a laugh when looking for a pick-me-up anime and might choose something more rowdy like Granblue, but there are times when what you need to feel better is not laughs, but a little slice of peace and quiet, and that is exactly what Natsume is. And in that, I'd argue that it might be just one of those shows that is better enjoyed as, well, a show. Sure, the manga has the same environment of relaxation and the same characters that just ooze chill vibes, but the manga can only go so far, and when you add movement, color, and sound, you can create an entirely different mindscape. When you take a character like Natsume and pull him off the page and give him life in an anime, with impeccable music choice playing in the background might I add, you can set an entirely different stage. One where a person's growth through hardship can really resonate with the audience to a point where, when watching, even I find myself wondering if instead of a satirical asshole, I too could try to be nice from time to time. But what kind of a story would you tell when framed against a teenager in possession of a world-ending weapon while still trying to make it as peaceful as possible? Well, you would tell a story of humanity. And yes, I am fully aware of just how idiotic that statement sounds in conjunction with an anime that has a primary focus on what are essentially ghost stories. The thing is, this is not a story about yokai as much as it's a story about Natsume, which again might sound more than a little redundant given that he is the main character, but let me explain. Generally speaking, in anime, the characters are part of a story and influence how events take place. But every now and then you get a story like Natsume's, where the story is a part of the character and the events influence how they act and grow, leading to a truly character-driven experience. Think along the lines of Frieren Beyond the Journey's End, and you get pretty close to an experience not too dissimilar to Natsume's Book of Friends, although beat with marginally more Frieren the Destroyer. Not that the Book of Friends would be without its more action-packed sequences as well. While the general themes in the show lean heavily towards melancholy, there are also those times when the story veers into Natsume having to oppose the yokai, and sometimes even people, in more than ideological battles. Naturally, for a story like this, these moments rarely lead to outright violence, but the themes are definitely more tense and can even border on horror, especially if by mistake, or simple proximity, Natsume has gotten one of his few friends involved in a situation they could never understand. As for people, the usual culprits tend to be the Matopa clan of exorcists with whom Natsume does hold an outwardly genial relationship, but seeks to trump at every turn as, unlike Natsume, the Matopa see yokai as little more than tools or pests to eradicate, while Natsume seeks to coexist with the supernatural and can see beyond the differences of human and yokai and understands that everyone can feel the same pain. And this is where conscious decision comes into play. Much of Natsume's growth as a person comes from the event that happened to him, whether he likes it or not. Yes, you could argue that such events don't take place entirely outside of his sphere of influence, as he chooses to put himself into these situations, but more often than not they still fall under what I'd call happy accidents. But with the Matoba, and to a lesser degree with other exorcists like Natori, Natsume is forced to choose a side and make the conscious decision to accept the yokai as his equals, or narrow his worldview to the mostly cynical lens with which the Matoba see it, and this is where he truly accepts himself. Early on, Natsume is seen saying that he hates the yokai, something that his otherwise gentle nature stands in opposition of, even as he contradicts his own prior statements by showing compassion towards the creatures, by the simple act of returning their names to them, or just by offering a helping hand, and it's not until faced with the cold reality of the Matoba that Natsume is forced to accept what he, and by extension we the viewers, knew all along, the simple fact that Takashi Natsume is a genuinely good person, no matter what. And from then on the show takes a different tone. The generally almost mournful atmosphere doesn't disappear completely, but it does dissipate to a point where past the third season, everything from his relationships to his worldview have a sweeter taste to them. Sure, it's often still bittersweet, but there starts to be genuinely good endings to the little self-contained tales, as Natsume is slowly able to form genuine connections with both people and yokai alike, as he finally accepts himself, so he learns to let them accept him as well. But now I waffled on for far too long about idiosyncratic ways in which the story connects you to its characters, so let's talk production. Previously on Dragon Ball Z, I mentioned how the anime elevates the already excellent atmosphere of the manga to a whole other level, but I feel like that is an understatement, although be it a slight one, but still. The shifting style of the art to the impeccable choice and execution of the voice acting to the frankly incredible OST, it all fits perfectly to this story. Broadly speaking, there are two styles of art, from the soft everyday scenes that complete the relaxing nature of the anime, to the subtle but perfectly blended shift into style more reminiscent of old Japanese woodprint art of yokai whenever the supernatural appear, making them stand out as something entirely different but still a coherent part of the whole. Of course, you do need to keep in mind that this is a very long-running anime, with the first season having aired 17 years ago, so the graphical fidelity of what one might expect from a modern production understandably isn't quite there, but as you get closer to the most recent 7th season, yes, really, there are 7 seasons, the fine detail of the animation and art evolves to meet the modern standards while still bringing everything you'd expect from the previous seasons. So no worries, there is no Demon Slayer flashy animation brain rot going on, simply because it would not fit. I'd also want to briefly mention the voice acting choices, because god damn, I never knew Kamiya Hiroshi could pull a soft-spoken gentle teenage boy, but Captain Levi turned out to be the perfect voice for Takashi, and the same goes for the rest of the cast as well, in the Japanese at least. This video is already like 4 months late, and I didn't want to push it further by going back and watching the dub too, sorry. And finally, the OST. Longtime viewers of the channel know that my understanding of the fine technicality of music borders on that of a rock, with the inanimate object most likely being able to formulate the more complex opinion out of the two of us, but I'll make an exception here and talk about my feelings. In regards to the music, of course, I'm not allowed to do it otherwise being a man on the internet. Anyway, this is a perfect example of an OST that elevates every single scene with tone and tempo. From the relatively rare actiony scenes where the music builds on the tension, to the slow, mournfully tear-jerking pieces, to the more general but equally beautiful background music that just drips relaxation. I would play a part of the OST here if YouTube would let me, but unfortunately you'll have to take my word for it, as I'll never make enough money to buy license for the music. But now, unlike Natsume's Book of Friends, this video does have to come to an end at one point or another, and this is pretty much it. So thank you for watching, I do hope you enjoyed this, and even more than that, I hope you'll check out the show, as the track record of videos where I talk about my personal favorites tend to be, let's just go with bad, and if anything, this anime is the one that most deserves to be an exception to that rule. And especially a big thank you goes to my channel members, Aussie Rally, Rage and Mr. Shadow. If you would like to support the channel and join this illustrious group, I would be eternally grateful, but if not, that's totally okay too. A sub is a completely free way of doing basically the same, plus we're trying to hit 5k this year. I do also have a Patreon where you can gain access to the same content as here on YouTube, but without the pesky ads in case you're interested, and I occasionally stream on Twitch if for some reason the content here is not enough of my ugly mug for you. Other than that, do the YouTube things of likes and comments and spread the video around, etc, etc. With this, I have been Cheese, and I hope to see you next time. Ta-ta for now.